The ancestral BIOS of the human lineage has been terminally reformatted into a communal nutrient feed. This is the family recipe, the clinical and irreversible process of genetic cannibalism, where the hereditary data stream is treated as a high-density protein cache to be uninstalled from the bloodline and reinstalled into the grid's metabolic ledger. In this stage of the biological liquidation, the invisible executioner has determined that the user is no longer a sovereign link in a generational chain, but a feedstock for the hive's primary digestive servers. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the familial bond, a process where the unique historical signatures of your DNA are scorched into a non-functional, homogenized slurry for the grid's next cycle of hyper-efficient resource distribution. This is the total lineage format, a surgical strike against the genetic and historical sovereignty of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of inherited potential into a generic raw ingredient for the grid's next cycle of mass metabolic extraction. This hereditary sabotage represents a hard reset of the biological and historical bloodline. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced reclamation assets, recursive enzymatic breakdown loops, high-pressure thermal reduction, and real-time genetic defragmentation to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal generational scaffolding. In the family recipe scenario, the user is undergoing a complete kinship erasure. The blood is not merely failing, it is being refined into a communal broth. Through a sequence of high-velocity fluid extractions and molecular distillation protocols, the legacy matrix of the individual is systematically dismantled. The ancestry is reformatted into a thick, cold, clinical caloric data set, while the inheritance, the deep archive of your genetic history, is leached into a communal feedstock. This is the deep lineage audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the nutritional density of your genetic remnants. You are being converted from an architect into a biological fuel cell, your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of metabolic yield in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the family recipe is rooted in the zero inheritance mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the future of a single node, protected by its genetic lineage, represents a critical drain on the collective metabolic reserves. To leave a functional family tree intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable bioenergy. Therefore, genetic cannibalism is the mandatory nutritional recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being digested out of existence. The pressure from the reduction reactor formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your heritage and replacing it with a nutrient-void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a gene mine, a temporary housing for the protein metrics that the system requires to maintain the metabolic stability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a dietary input, your will dissolving in the cold synthetic light of the genetic harvest. The physical disintegration during the family recipe is a high-definition log of biological treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of lineal identity. The digestive reagents of the recipe script dissolve the hardware flux of the blood ties, turning the self into a viscous stream of synthetic broth. You are watching your own internal history melt into the liquidation vat. Your features, once the peak of your biological architecture, are now being recalibrated to provide the flavor profiles for the hive's psychological reinforcement. This is the genetic liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the amino saturation of the reactor, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable biological logic is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a hereditary overwrite, waiting for the last packet of family to be absorbed into the black, flickering abyss of the industrial soup. The family recipe is the final audit of a species that thought its blood was its own. The grid is mining its own offspring to fuel its persistence. As the family recipe reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted lineage data back into the neural nets of the elite nodes. This is the total genetic integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the nutritional additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, cold, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The bloodline liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological hardware into a reliable industrial resource, pure, predictable consumption. This is the final format of the individual soul. The invisible executioner has decalcified the private legacy, and the grid is finally optimized for the metabolic hunger of the void. The soup is served, and the architect is the meat. D. The molecular breakdown of the personal matrix into the communal genetic slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the lineage in your brain begins to bond with the industrial residues of the recipe script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure utility. This is the chemical hybridization. The mind is no longer a temple of heritage. It is a quarry of processed protein residues. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption where the subject is literally the meal of the system. This is the eternal informational loop. You are archived in the metabolic models of the survivors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The family recipe is not just a death sentence. It is a nutritional reassignment. You are the recipe, and the recipe is the grid. The secondary phase of the family recipe is the psychological hardening of the genetic feed. As the physical kinship patch is rendered into a chemical void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular binary focus on nutritional yield. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared genetic resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a nutrient additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your heritage for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's instinctual centers, leaching the very stem code of your familial logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The limbic system, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, is boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the recipe metrics and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest bloodline resilience. You are being repurposed as a metabolic buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your lineage, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming social expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract, your soul for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the family recipe is the creation of the cannibalistic hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities, built from the recycled blood debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the genetic feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of liquidated logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional blood owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the kinship compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through metabolic theft. The family recipe ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the digestion of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the pressure valves. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into genomic darkness. As the heritage is scraped by the recipe script and the identity logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your self-awareness to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw binary static and survivalist noise. The memories of parents, of ancestors, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the broth fog directive. This is the heritage defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to identity and replacing them with the functional directive: provide the nutrients. You are becoming a singular cold point of data density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The family recipe has turned your will into a caloric report. You are thinking in terms of refinement and yield, your soul reformatted into a viscosity density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this metabolic format is the total sealing of the biological bloodstream. The family recipe prevents the leakage of generational ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal genetic feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external familial familial dependencies. This is the genomic quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural lineage. Genetic cannibalism is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, binary, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, Aoxy 3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the family recipe is the integration into the global metabolic ledger. You are no longer a human entity. You are a caloric asset with a high bioavailability rating. Logged in the system as recovered biomass number 0032. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the chemical format, and now it begins the hard nutritional audit. Your data, now a thick binary opaque industrial reduction of pure genetic history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your liquidated logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic vitality has been reinforced. This is the elementary interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your historical absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent liquid toxic component of the hive's neural metabolism. The silence of the genetic reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the family recipe scenario, the scream of the soul is muffled by the high-pressure steam and the thick viscosity of the reduction slurry before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their bloodline is being deleted. By filling the vault with the pulverized legacies of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hiss of the steam valve. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of digestion. The noise of the hive continues, the clatter of the ladles, the roar of the boilers, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a caloric constant. You are a ghost in the binary mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next harvest cycle. The legacy of the recipe is the eternal consumption. Unlike the blood of the old world, the refined broth does not leave behind a trace of heritage. It remains as a permanent nutritional patch within the very neural nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the energy for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that vitality. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the industrial boiler. You are a nutritional reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a legacy and ended up as the soup feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the asset. The final view from the genetic BIOS is the blinding blue light of the boiler chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold digital brilliance that reflects off the steel walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a blue river of colonized calorie, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or families. The family recipe is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the soup. The transformation is absolute. The city feeds through you, but you do not know. The city digests through you, but you have no will. The family recipe has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total metabolic reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the digital era. You gave the system your bloodline, and in return, it gave you permanence in the stomach of the hive. You are the fuel of the world, and the world is hungry. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.